Welcome to First All People's Church, Unitarian Universalist. My name is Michael Zepeda, and I'm your co-celebrant this morning. Our Sunday service is a shared time of worship for all present as we gather for music, spoken words, reflection, and inspiration as a religious community. Let us come together in a spirit of compassion and respect for ourselves and others. We especially welcome those who are visiting today. If you haven't already done so, please sign in at the visitors table by the front door, where you can be placed on our mailing list to receive the weekly emails and the monthly newsletter. Before we continue on to worship, I have a few announcements for you. Next Sunday, that is November the 5th, after service, after the potluck, is our congregational meeting at 1 p.m. Please plan to attend. We will review finances, the course of the minister search, and present the next year's board slate. So there will be some voting, and we'll need a quorum, so please, please come. The following Saturday, November the 11th, is our service auction. The dinner is barbecue. The theme is disco. It sounds like a blast. You can buy your tickets in the foyer after service. We are also taking donations for both the silent auction and for the live auction after the dinner. We can also purchase raffle tickets for the marvelous quilt that's on display out in the foyer. And you can find donation forms after service out in the foyer of the church. We do also have some announcements from Colleen Brewer. Please welcome.
I just want to talk this morning about an opportunity that's going to happen in addition to everything else next Sunday, November the 5th. Every week we say service is our prayer as part of our affirmation. We have many people in this church who are serving the church. If it were not so, the church would probably be dead by now. But there are critical needs in several areas. And there are some people, maybe some of you present here, who have not yet found their niche, their way to help support our church with their service. We, the board, are offering an opportunity for the people who are doing the work to present to the other people some of what our current needs are as far as volunteer help. We're planning to have, before and after next week's service, some tables out in the front, as many as we need for the people who are seeking volunteers to let other people know exactly what needs to be done. There's something at this church that each person would be able to do. So come and offer an opportunity to someone to volunteer, or find yourself a way to serve the church. Thank you. Next Sunday.
Thank you, Colleen. That's a job fair, right? This morning, we welcome to our pulpit Dr. Kendra Weddle, who is the scholar in residence at North Haven Church in Dallas, and who has been with us on several occasions. Kendra lives in Irving with her husband, Brian, and their chocolate Labrador retriever, Rue. Kendra, welcome back to All People's Church. We're glad to have you with us. And now please settle comfortably for a musical interlude.
Misha, I can't think of a more beautiful way to begin our hour together. Thank you. Will you now please stand in body and or spirit and join me in some gathering words. Now you have a little insert in your bulletin that has a litany by Becky Edmondson, and your part is really easy. All you have to say is, "We are the light of the world." Okay? So let's try our gathering together. When we share another's pain or offer a comforting ear to a friend in need, we are the light of the world. When we give bread to the hungry or support ways to house the homeless, we are the light of the world. When we fight temptations to wrongdoing within ourselves and treat our neighbors with respect, we are the light of the world. When we try to overcome differences with understanding and solve conflict with peaceful means, we are the light of the world. When we look for the good in other people and in ourselves, we are the light of the world. When we do not stay quiet in the face of prejudice, but speak our minds firmly and gently, we are the light of the world. When we fight despair within ourselves and side with hope, we are the light of the world. When we use our powers justly and in the service of love for humanity, we are the light of the world. We are the light of the world. Amen.
As you remain standing. Our chalice lighting words come to us from Overland UU Fellowship in Ohio. We light this chalice to find inner peace, love for one another, and faith in ourselves. Also, to be welcoming to whomever we meet and kind to all living creatures. So gather around this light of hope as we share this time together. Our hymn for October is number 346 in the green hymn or the gray hymnals. Come sing a song with me.
Come
Please remain standing for the affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. You may be seated.
The young and the young at heart are welcome to come forward and join with me for a short conversation. Good morning. Hello. Oh my goodness, how fun. It's nice to see you this morning. I do see that. That's so pretty. How are you today? Good? Good. Oh, hello. Yay. Come on up. Yeah, lots of fun. Yay, hello. There's room for everyone. There you go. Find a spot. You want to sit here? There you go. Oh, wow. That's perfect. And you have a doll. Yeah, it's nice to see you all here today. So I've been thinking about surprises. Do you, oh, you love surprises. So
Me too.
you too. So I'm wondering, yeah. So what's one of your favorite surprises? What'd you say?
Polly Pocket.
Polly Pockets. Oh my goodness, how fun. How about someone else? Can you think of a fun surprise you've had or you've experienced? Yeah. It's on there. It'll come. Okay. Did you have a fun surprise? That was funny. Any of the rest of you think about a fun surprise? Like I was thinking, I went to the state fair last week. Did you go to the state fair? And you know, sometimes there are fun surprises there in the form of fried food. Right? Some people have had some of that. The fried Oreos or...
Fried butter.
Oh, you love fried Oreos, yeah?
Fried butter.
Fried butter, right? And it was a surprise, right? When we first heard about fried butter, people were like, that will never work. That sounds terrible, right? And then people tried it and their minds were blown. It was so good, right? I know. So today we're going to talk about a surprise that actually goes really, really well like that. And so I hope that as you go throughout this day and this week, you might think about good surprises and what happens when you're actually surprised when something really works well. Will you do that for me? Think about that today and maybe talk about that with your friends and family. Okay? Thanks for coming up to talk with me today. It was so nice to see you. And as they return to their seats, we will join together in singing as we leave this friendly place. Thank you.
People's church leaders, both volunteers and staff members, work diligently throughout the year to be careful and attentive stewards of the congregation and its funds. Meetings, reports, and budgets are necessary to maintain the health of any organization, especially one that has endured for generations. But the gifts we make to our weekly offering or through an annual pledge represent far more than lines on a spreadsheet. Your contributions are a tangible commitment to the mission and vision of this congregation. Each time you give, you renew this commitment. And as a result, your support is entwined with all that we believe and all that we do here. It is our custom to share the undesignated cash offerings that are collected each week with a nonprofit or a charitable organization. Our current Share the Plate recipient is Jane's Due Process. From their website, the mission of Jane's Due Process is to help young people in Texas navigate parental consent laws and abortion bans confidentially access reproductive services. In the spirit of trust and generosity, we gratefully accept the offerings. Will the ushers please come forward? For hymn number 347 in the gray hymnal, Gather the Spirit.
may be seated. Our story this morning comes from 1 Samuel 25, which is a book in the Hebrew Bible. And what I'm going to share with you this morning is a very, very loose rendition taken from what's called the Inclusive Bible. Once upon a time, there was a man named David who was doing all he could to become king. While he was traveling around the desert, he heard about a rich man who was named Nabal. It wasn't a very good name, but it does tell you a lot about the person, because Nabal means fool or surly, and he was mean and he was very difficult to deal with. However, he was married to Abigail, who by contrast was intelligent and wise. When David heard that Nabal was having his sheep sheared, and this always occurred in a time and place that led to some very lavish parties, David sent his people to talk with Nabal's people because David wanted a donation. He figured that this wealthy man, Nabal, might still be in a party mood and therefore would feel very generous toward someone wanting to become king. David was wrong. Nabal was not feeling it and instead dismissed David's request without even wanting to know any more about it. Well, as you can imagine, this reaction did not sit well with David, and so he immediately prepared for a violent scuffle. So he and David and about 400 of his men went in search of Nabal, and they had their swords already drawn. Fortunately, Abigail found out that David was on the move. And she knew she had to act quickly and to do it on the sly so that her husband would be none the wiser. So she made bread and wine, and she cooked some mutton, and she gathered lots of grain and collected raisins and figs. She had so much food that she had to load it onto several donkeys. And off she went in search of David. And sure enough, she found him. But before he could even dismount from his horse, she was on her knees, telling him exactly what he wanted to hear. He was a worthy ruler. She was just a lowly person. And in fact, David should really blame her for her husband's stupidity because he was, well, remember, stupid. But Abigail was sure that God was behind David's ascent to be king, and wouldn't it be better for him if he didn't unnecessarily kill her husband? And in fact, she even went further and said God had kept David already from doing any harm. David's response? Well, he accepted all that Abigail had to say to him as a really good argument for changing his mind. And so he said to her, "Return to your home in peace." He had heard her wise counsel and granted her request. A really interesting story we'll talk more about in a minute.
At this time in our service, we pause to our honor and give time and attention to those things most important to us. We gather here for healing and for peace in our hearts and in the world, and honor our time together with the shared memories and news from the congregation. Each week there is a journal outside the entrance to the sanctuary where you can write a message of memory or hope. Also, at any time during our service, you are welcome to come forward and light a candle in our meditation center here at this side of the chantel. Today, from our Book of Memory and Hope, we have include no specific requests, but I do think we should all give some reflection to the current situation in Israel and Gaza. And while it has been 4,000 years of scuffling, I'm sure they're going to work it out. Sure, right around the corner.
Thank you so much for the special music this morning. Well, many of us have heard the story of Bathsheba and King David. But maybe for many of us, this was one of the first times or the first time to hear about Abigail and her connection to King David. She's obviously a woman of initiative and wisdom and hospitality, and she knew how to be generous. Now, the setting of the story is the period known as the monarchy, when Israel was united under a king, and the king at that time was Saul. And we usually think about that period in a time that's probably something other than what it really was. People lived in fairly remote cities or towns. Many of them lived in the mountaintops, places where they wouldn't really have much of a connection to political or civil life. And so at this point in the story, David is basically living as an outlaw in a southern wilderness region, and he's trying to build a following. And as would make sense, he sends his messengers to Nabal, this wealthy man, trying to build an alliance with him after hearing about his wealth, that Nabal had been shearing his sheep. In other words, the narrator was kind of introducing us as a reader to the text to say, hey, pay attention, this guy's rich. And by the way, the sheep shearing was a time of raucous celebration, and so all the things that would go along with that you would expect to find. And David was hoping that in that spirit of celebration and joyousness, that Nabal would be in a generous mood and be willing to kind of work with him. And he was not. Nabal wanted none of it. So David had told his messengers, though, to lead with peace. He said, when you go and you meet his people, say, peace be upon you, peace to your house. Peace be with all that you have. And Nabal, the fool, responds with, who is this David? Shall I take my bread and water and the meat that I have butchered for my shears and give it to men who I know come from anywhere? So he was not generous, he was not hospitable, and he was clearly self-centered. And he couldn't even be bothered to figure out who was this David. He just dismissed it all without any further thinking. Now, I think it is not lost on many of us that the biblical narratives are violent. There are swords and slingshots, migrating massacres all over the place. And the narrators who spin these tales sometimes want us to believe that a loving God was also involved in these destructive plots. And truth be told, violence comes all too easily. Not only for those who lived long ago, but for us. But then there's Abigail. Now, she refused to accept the conventional wisdom that assumed that power comes only through domination. You know, the physical kind, the kind that wields a sword quickly, more easily than walking away from some kind of insult hurled at us. My guess is that Abigail had lived in the midst of conventional wisdom long enough, and that she knew full well the havoc of male power, of power over, and that she was ready to try something else. In a situation in which her risks were substantial, in which she subverted conventional wisdom for a better, wiser way, we get invited into her narrative if we can kind of use our imaginations and put ourselves there into her story, let's kind of look to see a little more closely what happened there. When Abigail heard about the impending violence between her husband and his attendants and David and his attendants, she gets busy and she provides enough food for peacemaking. Now, I earlier didn't give you the details on this, so let me give you a few things. 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of dried figs. You get the point. It was a lot of food. It was a feast. And with her bounty, she had to load it on not one, but many donkeys. And she sends her young men out to tell David that she, not Nabal, not her husband, not the fool, she was coming. And so then she leaves word without saying anything to her husband about it, right? She's got to be on the sly here. Now, when she meets David, Abigail, in what she says to him, secures peace. She goes into this persuasive speech. And in that speech, I think she does a few things. First, she asks David to ignore her husband. Here's kind of how it occurs in the inclusive Bible, even though I didn't give you this earlier. She says something like, "Sovereign One, blame me, and please allow me, your humble handmaid, to speak my peace. How can you even notice this wretched person? He's the embodiment of the meaning of his name, fool, and fool he is." So she makes her point. I'm the one here. Deal with me. Second, she continues as if David's plan of attack has already been canceled. She says something like, "Your Highness, as God lives and as you live, it is God who has restrained you." Already happened. God who has restrained you from shedding blood and avenging yourself personally. Okay, so she's making several assumptions here. And then she offers him gifts and suggests that God will protect him in the future. So she says something like, "As God lives, may your enemies and all who desire you to be ruined become like Nabal. God will establish your family forever. And because you fight God's battles so well, and calamity will not overtake you as long as you live. And if anyone approaches you or attempts to approach you with foul motives, well, God will wrap up your life and put it among the divine treasures." She's laying it on really thick. Even though she gets very little credit for neutralizing an otherwise violent outcome, I think she is a clear example of being countercultural, that is, refusing to accept the assumptions of her day. Everyone else assumed that this battle between David and Nabal was all but set. This was going to happen, except Abigail. But since her actions involved, making a bunch of food, and I would suspect more because she was a woman, we really haven't given her story much attention and basically chalk it up to inconsequential. She's just another woman, an insignificant figure, a minor player in the biblical narrative. But how many people take the kind of risk that she did to go against accepted norms so confidently and to walk a path of nonviolence? Think about it. In running out to meet David, the most likely outcome of that was that she would be killed. That's just not what you did. That's not how things worked. Today, when our world seems to be imploding everywhere we turn, I think we need to hear stories like Abigail. We need to be reminded that there's an alternative wisdom at work. We need to be reminded that peace does not come from war. Can we open our minds to the possibility that violence is not the only way? I know, this is such a counter-cultural way of thinking, right? I mean, come on. Like, could you imagine there being a department of peacemaking? Or that maybe we would have a secretary of peacemaking? It sounds ridiculous. Doesn't even come off the tongue. But how much true wisdom as a culture do we fail to consider because we continue to bring violence front and center and fail to look more widely? Just think about the images we consume on a regular basis. Cars set on fire, missiles loaded and fired, men carrying automatic guns as they move into position, tanks rolling around through rough terrain, military leaders telling us they will ultimately be successful. We are on a diet of violence. Julia Baca is a filmmaker whose experiences in the Middle East prepared her to ask, I think, a very interesting question. And the question was how we wage conflict. Not why, how. How we wage conflict. And in her 2016 TED Talk, she cited a recent study by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan that covered the years from 1900 to 2006. 1900, 2006. In that time period, they found non-violent campaigns were successful 53% of the time. That's over half. Compared to violent campaigns that were successful only 26% of the time. Further, the nonviolent campaigns were less likely to cause physical harm to those waging the campaign, to their opponents, and critically, they typically led to more peaceful and democratic societies. The greatest predictor of a movement's decision to adopt violence or nonviolence. This is going to shock you. The greatest predictor of a movement's decision to adopt violence or nonviolence is not whether it is left or right wing. It is not whether it is more or less religious. It is not if it is up against a democracy versus a dictatorship. It is not even about its levels of repression. But rather, it is about its ideology regarding women in public life. The stories that we tell are crucial to how we see ourselves and how we navigate our world. Gandhi, the great Hindu leader, was convinced about the potential of nonviolent resistance when he read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. But before Jesus, there was Abigail, the wife of a fool who trusted herself to achieve peace when violence seemed imminent. So what would happen today if there were people who became convinced that there is wisdom to be found in doing things differently? If, as we learn, nonviolent movements are more successful than violent ones, what is it that makes them more successful? Well, according to Erica Chenoweth, there are at least 3 reasons, and none of these involve melting the hearts of the oppressors while holding hands and singing Kumbaya. Nonviolent campaigns attract 11 times more participation than violent ones. In seeking to build bridges across differences, more groups and more people are likely to sign on, and they create more sustaining bonds. A second reason they're more successful is that bridge building activities are not restricted to the oppressed, and instead involve people across both the oppressed and the oppressor groups. And further, leaders from the oppressive regime find it easier to shift their loyalties toward the oppressed when the resistance is nonviolent and there's no fear of violent retribution. And finally, a third reason is that the initiators of nonviolent campaigns rely heavily on creativity. And that creativity is very difficult to predict. Think, for example, Gandhi and the Salt Marches. Well, Abigail, she doesn't show up on any list of saints, biblical or otherwise, and she's become a footnote, easily forgotten in a world of a different time and place. And Nabal, her husband, the fool, as well as David, the figure who would eventually become king, both readily assumed violence was the best avenue to getting what they wanted. And if Abigail had not intervened between them, who knows what might have happened. But despite what she accomplished, we don't get to know her backstory. No one has filled us in on the myriad ways that she learned to ask questions, but she seemingly did. How did she become so brave? How did she cultivate an understanding of her circumstances that went below the surface? I think we surely know that this kind of wisdom and strength and awareness is developed over time. We don't just wake up one day and decide to change our entire perspective on the world and how we live in it. No, this is kind of a step-by-studied step that we have to take. No one can do it for us. The Buddhists would tell us, everyone must find our inner Buddha. Goodness knows we're living in a time where violence appears to be winning. It's all around us. We can hardly avoid seeing its images. And on the one hand, this is not only cause for alarm and sadness and despair, and all that is all true, right? But on the other hand, is this not our opportunity to develop our own Abigail muscles? What are we doing to show the world a different way? A way that doesn't lead to more violence, but instead draws on courage to stand up and say, there is another option. One that actually leads to peace. So my hope for us is that may Abigail's peacemaking become part of who we are. May her savvy and her courage become part of our story. And may her willingness to live into alternative wisdom become part of who we are. May we like Abigail, choose a different, more just, and peace-filled way. Amen. As we continue to think about being peacemakers, let's stand as you are able to sing our closing hymn, number 120, Turn Back.
Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the Spirit and the sparks within us remain alight. Connecting us invisibly but palpably, we are one. And from every window, our light shines.
Following the benediction, I invite you to stay for coffee and refreshments and conversation. And thank you again for the special music today that was so beautiful and that really brought us into this sacred space. Thank you. Y'all, let's go and be peacemakers. Amen.
Amen.